And welcome back. My next guest is Dennis Rodriguez, the former chief of the New City Fire Department and a U.S. Air Force veteran. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, George.
So I'm very happy to have you, on the show. And this is our veterans segment. And since we've been started this program and doing these shows, this is our 35th episode. We've had different vets on each of the episodes, and we asked them to kind of tell their story because I think it's important to recognize our vets and preserve some of that history of our vets for people to see and how important it is, that service that they render to our country. So thank you for being my guest, but thank you for service to our country in the Air Force. Before we get to your story as a vet, maybe just give a little background about yourself, where you were born and raised, your education.
Okay. I was born in the Bronx, 1974, and I moved up to Rockland County in town of Clarkstown, New City, at the age of 13. So I've been in Clarkstown now 31 years almost, and went to school at Rockland Community College and the Community College of the United States Air Force.
Good. What part of the Bronx were you born in?
I don't remember. A long time ago.
Okay. So it's we have a lot of transplanted folks from the Bronx up here. So certainly the Bronx has made a major contribution to Rockland County and to Clarkstown. So so where did you graduate high school up here?
Clarkstown South, 1993.
93. So you graduated South 93, and then I guess what did you do after graduation?
After graduation, I started going to school at RCC, and I actually started working for the United States Postal Service as a mail carrier in Spring Valley. Then at that point, I kind of felt I wasn't going too far, and I looked at joining the United States Air Force.
So why the Air Force? What made you pick the Air Force as opposed to one of the other branches?
That's a great question. Never thought about it that way. It just looked enticing. Fighter planes, aiming high, and
right.
Yeah.
Right. So definitely, you're right. They're marketing with aiming high. That's I'm certain that would attract lots of folks. So you decided to go to the Air Force.
Yep.
Tell us about that beginning experience. So you enlisted. What was it? Just walk us through what that was.
So I joined the Air Force actually on their 50th anniversary, December 2nd, 1997. And from there, I started basic training in San Antonio, Texas, Lackland Air Force Base. From there, I was assigned to a tech school for air traffic control.
Well, let's go back to basic. So what was basic training like back then for you?
A lot of early mornings, a lot of PT, physical fitness, education, a lot of schooling. Mm-hmm. They go from finances to health to shooting M16s, 9mm, survival, teamwork.
Mm-hmm. So that was intensive, and basic training was how long? How many?
6.5 weeks.
6.5 weeks, and then from basic training, what took place next?
From basic training in San Antonio, Texas, I got transferred to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, to start air traffic control school.
Oh, cool.
So as an air traffic control school in the United States Air Force is a 14.5-week program, really intensive. And on the civilian side, if you go to Oklahoma City to the FAA Tech Center, it's a 2-year program.
Oh, wow. And you did it in 14?
We did it in 14.5 weeks.
Wow. Wow. So so that must have been a lot of long hours, a lot of study, to be able to kind of get through that. So then what happened after that experience?
So after tech school, we got transferred to Langley Air Force Base, the first fighter wing of the United States Air Force. 3 fighter squadrons that were basically deployed constantly in rotations to southern and northern Iraq and South Korea.
Oh, wow. So this was pre-9/11, correct?
Pre-9/11 at this point.
But and how long were you at Langley for?
Langley, I spent about 4 years, so from 1998 to 2002.
So you were at Langley for 9/11?
Yes, sir.
That must have been one heck of an experience. Maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Yep. So as an air traffic controller at Langley Air Force Base, we actually had an alert commitment. So we had F-16s always on standby for any moment to deploy anywhere along the East Coast to the Northeast to intercept any aircraft that would enter U.S. airspace or the FAA couldn't get positive identity on. So we would practice those scramble drills constantly. It was working with the area airports from Washington Center all the way down to the local airports in our area to get these fighter jets up. So on 9/11, of course, we were attacked, and that red light goes off in the control tower, and we pick it up, and it's actually a real-world, not an exercise, but a real-world mission. And initially our fighter jets went up, followed by a couple phone calls from our generals saying to arm our jets, which we didn't have that authority in the tower, but by the time we hung up the phone, the missile loaders were already coming across the runway to start loading up airplanes to get them up in the air as quickly as possible.
Wow. That must have been I know I'll never forget, and as we're taping this program, we're just a couple of weeks out from the anniversary of 9/11, and I'll never forget 9/11 and my experiences, but certainly, your experience actually working and watching America pivot from peacetime to wartime right in front of you. That's just, it must have been really remarkable. Tell me a little bit about some of your experience with some of the guys that you work with in the Air Force. Obviously, they went into war afterwards. So maybe some of the experience of some of those guys, as we move forward. You were certainly still in, I think, just for the beginning of Afghanistan, correct?
Correct.
Did any of the guys in your fighter wings, or did you come into contact with some of those guys that had any duties overseas in Afghanistan or Iraq?
Iraq, we did, because that was, I said before, we did the northern and southern no-fly zones to protect those airspaces. But more importantly was the pilots doing the Northeast home defense, flying over to U.S. cities like New York City, because ultimately their orders could have been shoot down a commercial airplane or a civilian Cessna if needed. So hearing some of those stories, that's something that they weren't really trained for up front, because normally it was going overseas and, to Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Iraq. So that was, different for them to shoot somebody down over U.S. soils if needed.
I'll never forget and I've spoken about this before and actually wrote about it in one of my columns in one of the weekly newspapers here, about the experience of, being in Nanuet, coming, getting home, after the towers, the first incident, on my way into work, and F-16 flying over, Rockland County. You don't really see those all that often. I can't recall the time before that I had seen it, but two F-16s just kind of making loops around Rockland County in New York. It was really startling and scary. Experience for all of us to see, and you knew instantly just based on the news and based on those visuals that this is the world is different, and the world has been forever different since then. Let's talk a little bit about, you did your 4.5 years in the Air Force. What rank did you attain?
I obtained a rank up to senior airman. Okay,
so you did your 4.5 years and then you segued out. What did you do afterwards? You eventually now have a veteran-owned business, correct?
Right, but shortly prior to my veteran-owned business, I got picked up by a headhunter and I started working for a major defense company, basically in charge of the logistics of moving electronic warfare for our U.S. Air Force platforms around the world to our U.S. warfighters, which was kind of unique because it got me back in touch with old friends that maintained F-15s at Langley Air Force Base, who are now stationed in Alaska, somewhere around the world in Germany, and it was really neat to reconnect with them in a strange way, now being on the civilian side. Then shortly after, I was approached by a major fire truck dealer in New York State to work for him. Ultimately, for about 7 years, I did the lower Hudson Valley selling firefighting equipment for him. He ultimately lost his business, and I was approached by a lot of the suppliers, and that's how I started my business 5.5 years ago, and have grown it, covering basically the whole state of New York and international markets, and some of our warfighters overseas.
That's great. What's the name of the business?
New York Fire Equipment.
Right, which you have on your shirt. I just wanted you to tell our viewers. So New York Fire Equipment. And again, Dennis, I want to thank you for your service to our country, but you also have given distinguished service to our community through the New City Fire Department. Why don't you talk just a little bit about your services in the New City Fire Department?
So I joined the New City Fire Engine Company #1 in January 2nd, 1991, and through the years did numerous training, responded to thousands of calls in 27 years to the community and surrounding districts also for mutual aid. And when I came back home from the Air Force, they started asking me if I wanted to be an officer. And I started as an assistant chief engineer, which was to help maintain the apparatus that we have across the street. Then I became the chief engineer, and slowly I went through the 2 lieutenant ranks, captain, and then 2 assistant chief positions. And then ultimately, I just finished being the chief of the fire department this past January.
And you gave tremendous service to the department. I think one of my first weeks as town supervisor, we had a snowstorm, we had a fire in New City. I remember actually stopping by the house afterwards to thank you guys and congratulate you on your service. But New City is one of the busier fire departments in our area, and just they've had tremendous leadership, certainly under you, and just tremendous fire department. So I want to thank you for that service.
Thank you.
Let's just go back in the minute that we have left. Maybe talk a little bit more about how someone can get involved with the fire department, and maybe talk a little bit more about your business.
Yep.
You know, exactly. Give you the opportunity to speak about that.
Thank you. So join the New City Fire Engine Company #1. You can go to our website, newcityfire.org, and we have a membership tab there, and you can fill out an application. By all means, stop down to the firehouse on Monday nights, about 7:30. There's always a group of gentlemen there that are willing to talk to you and bring you into the fire department. Unfortunately, New York State has increased the amount of hours of training, so that kind of detracts new recruits, because it's a couple hundred hours now. Versus when I joined in 1991, it was 36 hours.
Right.
So, but don't let that discourage you, because if you want to do it, you'll do it. Just this year alone, in the last 8 months, I think we've had 10 new recruits.
Well, that's great.
So, and they're doing it. So,
Cool.
And as for my business, yeah, it's been a milestone as a veteran-owned business. We've grown tremendously, and we're hiring also throughout New York State. And we love just meeting all different fire departments and people around New York State and the country too, because we do travel and we do do a lot of education. And
so your business, you're a supplier of a lot of different types of fire equipment, for everything from hoses, extinguishers, couplings.
Yep, all that, and including the turnout gear and the new push now to protect our firefighters from cancer.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
New materials out on the market, and our turnout gear and hoods that we wear.
Well, Dennis, I want to thank you for being such a great guest. And again, I've said it, I think, 2 or 3 times, but let me reiterate it. Thank you for your service to our country and to your service to our community, because it's folks like you that are not all that common, who decided to give back in service, in the military, and thank you for that. And then also to continue with that service as a civilian, as a firefighter here, as a volunteer firefighter within New City. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for being such a great guest.
Thank you, Supervisor Holman. Thank you.
So coming up, our next guest will be Harriet Cornell, legislator. Stay tuned.